waiting to go live.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to the producers of A Prayer for Compassion for joining us, Victoria Moran and Thomas Jackson. It's a pleasure to have you all. And so today I thought we would talk about Eid and Ramadan and what is happening with the wet markets in New York City and everywhere, and how we need to get our places of worship to start becoming places where vegan food is being offered to people. And so that we start creating that as a new normal in places of worship, that it becomes a place where we teach people how to cook vegan food, how to prepare vegan food, and how to spread the message of compassion through our food choices. And I think that's a great theme to start around. So if you would like to expound on that a little bit, Victoria, would you start?
Sure, thank you, Sailesh. And if anybody hears a pigeon in the background, it's a pigeon. That's Thunder. He's a rescue pigeon, blind in one eye, so he lives inside. So I'll mute when I'm not talking, otherwise there will be a pigeon here. So thank you so much for starting with this topic, Sailesh. I'm old enough to remember that when you went to church, you dressed up. I was raised Roman Catholic, so head coverings for women and gloves weren't required. You just wore them because it was church. And I think we've always had this idea that no matter how we fall short in our regular lives, we rise to the occasion for our place of worship, to gather with those who share our view of God and salvation. And we're just a little bit better than we are the rest of the week. And that's exactly what you're talking about with this. You're not saying we're going to go in and we're going to say, if you're a Methodist, you have to be a vegan. What we're saying is when you're in your place of worship, let's elevate this. One of my favorite lines from Jesus is, and I, if I be lifted up, will draw all men unto me. And by serving vegan food, we're lifting up that whole group, that whole congregation.
Thank you so much. Thomas, would you care to share on the same topic?
Yeah, you know, as we traveled around the last year and had a lot of Q&As, this is something we talked about a lot. And it's also something we put a lot of work into as far as with the Interfaith Vegan Coalition, which we started in the film, during the making of the film. It has really grown, and we've really got a lot of resources for a lot of different religions. And we've just finished the creating the Compassionate Living Circles, which is thanks to Jessica and Climate Healers for letting us borrow some of their resources. Now we're able to, if anybody out there is interested in creating a compassionate living circle in your community or in your church, you can reach out to us, and we have a way for you to get certified. We have a lot of resources for you to use. We have template letters for the ministers to help you get the conversation started, whether it be a screening of A Prayer for Compassion or a cooking demo or a potluck, a vegan potluck. You know, there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different resources that we have available to people who are ready to get the conversation started in their churches. And I think it's important that I like the way Victoria was, you know, framing it in the sense that we want to bring it in. We don't want to come in and say, you have to be a vegan, you know, because I think my thing is I want ministers to know, just like in our earlier episode today, when Renee talked about how she was had to walk away from her church for feeling ridiculed for her choices. I want ministers to know, you know, whether or not you want to be vegan or not, that's okay. I just want you to realize that veganism is in alignment with your tradition. So instead of ridiculing the vegans, you should really be honoring them for upholding and living your teachings of compassion. So I think if we can approach it in a way that we're saying, we're not telling you you have to do it. It's just like we want to get a vegan option for school lunches. And if we go in there saying everything has to be vegan, people are going to say no, you know, but they need to realize as we exist and there's more and more of us, and we should all have an option. And I think what this will do eventually is it puts more vegans, it gives vegan options at potlucks, you know, just I know the Jewish Veg has a policy where they're trying to get synagogues to always have a vegan option. Like that's something we want to promote as well. Having that there gives people, it makes it normal. It makes it more normal. They know somebody. Very seldom do I meet anybody now that doesn't say, oh, my cousin or my brother or my niece or somebody, like they know it. So you put it in their face, you know, oh yeah, I've heard of this. You let them taste it and you just love them, you know, and you really look for the ways that maybe you can, if they're suffering some way, you just kind of offer them this beautiful gift that we all have. You know, this is the main thing we have to remember. This is a gift we want to bring to them. You know, we're not coming to change your religion, tell you who to worship, who not to worship, how you worship. It's all a matter of, this is about nonviolence, and all traditions at their basis promote nonviolence and compassion. So I'm excited that we're having this conversation today. So hopefully that answered that.
I think we forget sometimes that a lot of religious people do find vegetarians and vegans kind of interesting. Not that they'd want to do it. I mean, I've had people say to me things, well, you know, I'm not as good as you. I don't eat like, and it's like, it's not about good, but that's kind of how they see it. And the biggest example of that for me was years ago, I was working with Tibetan refugees and spending time in Tibet and northern India. And I remember all through Tibet, where people are Buddhist, where they have the teaching of nonviolence, but where it's almost impossible to be vegetarian simply because nothing grows there. You know, maybe a few cabbages and potatoes, but basically, you know, you're at 16,000 feet elevation and it's just very hard to grow vegetables. But they got it that we were vegan, my daughter, my boyfriend at the time, and myself. And so they would prepare these incredible spreads and leave us to eat. And I asked one of the translators, what is the thing? Why won't they eat with us? Oh, well, you know, because you're vegetarian, as they called it. They think that this means that you are a very, very high spiritual person. And of course, that was very embarrassing because I look at them, you know, living in all the hardship they have, meditating day and night, being happy. And I think they're the high spiritual people. But, you know, there's a lot of respect that people have for what we do. And I think we can use that in our outreach.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you brought the point of us elevating ourselves when we go to church, which is us elevating ourselves when we go to temples. We literally, we used to do that too. My mother used to always wear flowers in her hair before she went to church, before she went to temple. And even after the temple puja, she would take the flowers and put it on her hair. So it's something that we know that we are trying to be the better versions of ourselves when we go to a temple. And simultaneously, we see that slaughterhouses have become literally termed immoral, right? It's being termed immoral because it is not only hurting animals, it's hurting people. The people are getting sick from working there. So do you think it's time now for the awakening in places of worship that it is a question of morality and therefore this needs to be the new normal?
Well, I don't know that we've quite reached morality yet. I think sometimes that for those of us who are in this world, we've lived this way for a long time. We know lots of people who do this. We're just like, oh yeah, it's just, I mean, give us a week or two, we'll have everybody. Last night, my husband and I were watching a documentary series about various historical events. And one was the rise of fast food. And that was really fascinating to me because the rise of fast food kind of missed me. I mean, there was a time when I was living in a rural area that they knew me at the Taco Bell because my daughter and I would go through the drive-through and the guy would say, oh, bean burrito minus cheese plus lettuce. But basically, never been a big fast food person. But the idea of how much meat is raised just for fast food outlets and how many millions, billions of people around the world eat this food, depend on this food, it really helps me to get it in perspective that as much as we're out in the news now and as powerful as we are within ourselves to spread this, I don't think we're as big as we think we are. And so I think we're going to do better going into religious organizations, depending on which ones we're talking about, with the message of either health, which is very big in Christian churches, particularly in the African-American community. They've already figured that part out, maybe not as far as whole food plant-based, but they know there's something wrong with the food. And then also, I think particularly with the more liberal kinds of congregations, Unitarians, New Thought, it's the planet and saving the earth and turning around climate change. And we're going to find people in all these places who also get it about the animals.
Yeah, and you know, along with that, with what we're seeing now with the slaughterhouse workers getting sick, being deemed essential and being forced back to work, I think a lot of people are seeing that. There's a lot of, you know, it just breaks my heart that, you know, to know that this is so unnecessary and that there's so many of them, that it really is a breeding ground. That and the fact that so many places, countries where people are starving, you know, they're growing grains and they're shipping them to another country to feed animals. Like these facts, like whether or not, because, you know, I grew up in the South. People here hunt, they fish, you know, and a lot of them they go out here and they see a beautiful environment. They don't see these things, you know, and they try to dismiss them, but you really can't dismiss when we're, you know, if they're human rights, you really can't dismiss the idea of what we're doing to these people for our greed, for this thing that is unnecessary. And each one of us daily proves this, you know, and the more people get exposed to the media and they see all these healthy people and they see people like the guy who's the Simon guy who does the, what's he do? He does the singing show, you know, Simon Cowell or something, like, you know, all the weight he lost. I mean, just people in their view, Steve Harvey, you know, whoever, like, it's just really Joaquin and Billie Eilish and all these people who are showing people that you can thrive. So I think people know they're not going to waste away. You know, so that's a good idea. So now it's just reminding people what Victoria was saying about the animals, about the environment, and about how this is really in our face right now, what's happening to the slaughterhouse workers, and reminding them, really, a lot of people just aren't aware that there are people starving where food is being shipped away. I mean, people really should be aware of that. That's the fourth fact I think a lot of times we overlook when we talk about this.
And picking up on what Thomas said about the celebrities, I think each and every one of us needs to live an aspirational life. That doesn't mean that we're ever going to walk out on that stage and get an Academy Award, but it means that people are looking at us because we're doing something different. We're doing something unusual. So if you think about it, maybe once in your life you've known a Mennonite. Maybe once in your life you've known someone from Croatia. I mean, whatever it is, when you hear of that belief or that place or whatever, you think of that person. And a lot of people haven't met very many vegans. And so sometimes people think, oh, I need to stop my career. I need to do something, you know, in the vegan world. Well, maybe you do and maybe you don't. But if you do well, if you have this reputation for being honest, upright, loving, kind, easy to get along with, it doesn't matter if you're doing work in the vegan world or not. you're bringing veganism up every day that you show up and do you.
You know, can I speak for, you know, Thomas, what you said about the workers being essential. This particular group of workers is essential and dispensable at the same time. And that's really what we're saying with this, which tends to be immigrant, which tends to be poor, which tends to, you know, like, okay, we're essentially saying we don't care about your life. Our life is more important than your life. Our, you know, pleasures or whatever, or our customs are more important than yours. And I think any person of faith, if they really, really got in touch with what this is saying and how immoral it is, it's really hard, you know, as a person who aspires to live a spiritual life, a life of compassion, when you really take that in, what that is saying, with a statement you're making when you're saying that, okay, I don't care about what happens to this population of people, to this, you know, part of the planet, that it's that saying of what you do to one, you do to all, because there is no separation between us and any. We really get into the heart of our spirituality. We get into the depths of it. We get into that connection with source and the connection with all that is. There is no way to separate what we do to one, what we do to all, what we do to the earth. So, you know, if we really want to bring it home to our faith, then we can't. We just can't continue to put the blinders on, turn the blind eye, and let that be okay. And Sailesh, if I may, you started out asking about Eid. Tomorrow is the Feast of Eid, which is the feast at the end of Ramadan, which is the holiest month in Islam. It's a month of fasting, a month of prayer, a month of devotion. And it's a very deep and holy time. And in the Feast of Eid, like, you know, so many will tend to, okay, and just the same as at the end of Lent, right? It's the feast before and the feast after, you know. But when we go into the feast before and after our times of fasting, it doesn't mean that as people of faith that we can just cast everything aside and like, okay, now we get to go and, you know, do all the wild and crazy things that we wouldn't ordinarily want to do and feel good about in our hearts, just because we went through the time of fasting. So, you know, and in the teachings of prophetic medicine of the Prophet Muhammad, he taught about prophetic medicine and about in the ways that we are with food. And a lot of really beautiful teachings came out of that. He wasn't necessarily vegan and didn't preach a vegan message, but he definitely preached a lot about, you know, your relationship with food and respect with food and the body, to only eat when hungry, only take what you need from the earth. And, you know, depending on where you are is going to depend on, you know, what you take and the needs of the body and all of that. So we need to remember that when we come out of our times of fasting as well. And I say this to, you know, all of the people who practice fasting, that when you come out of a time of prayer, devotion, dedication, fasting, that it doesn't mean you just go, excuse the expression, hog wild, right? But you still maintain your beliefs and your principles and that which aligns with your body, your connection with earth and with nature. So I say that for my brothers and sisters. As Sailesh knows, I studied with a Sufi master from Jerusalem for 20 years and have practiced a lot of those practices over the last 25 years. So it's very dear to my heart.
Thank you for sharing, Deborah. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, there is a lot of discussions around halal versus, you know, kosher. So these are ways in which the religion kind of sanctions certain types of actions that you can do. And if you go behind it, I mean, the root of it is morality, is compassion, is trying to minimize suffering. And yeah, so even in India, there were people talking about, we need to have, just like halal certification, we need to have dharmic certification. We need to have certification for dharmic food. And I said, so does that include animal foods? And they said, yeah, dairy. And I said, how can that be dharmic? So ultimately, when you start looking at what is dharmic and what is halal, what is kosher in the modern era, you come right down to veganic agriculture, veganic growing, and vegan foods.
Yeah,
That's
being the
what
highest.
being the highest, yes.
Yeah.
So then it's all the same. I said, well, why don't you just certify it as halal? It's the same thing. So why are we differentiating ourselves? So it's very interesting how we are all converging in that sense. No matter which path we were on, we're kind of coming together and converging around veganism. So that's why I really love what you've been working on with the Interfaith Vegan Coalition and the Compassionate Living Circles. It's bringing us all together around this idea of compassion to animals, no matter what our paths are. And that's the beauty of this movie that you did. So every time I watch A Prayer for Compassion, and I watched it several times, every time I watch it, I get something new out of it. And I realized that I grew as a result of participating in this movie with you.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what we didn't get to explore so much is self-compassion, which is such an important thing. That's what the new film will be exploring some. Because a lot of times with activists, we see people tirelessly working without reflecting back and how looking at themselves and putting that same compassion back on themselves. So I think we're more effective when we're able to have self-compassion and self-care. And I kind of feel like the more you tune into your own self, the more it's hard to violate another person in any way. You become more sensitive to your own needs, and that makes you realize everybody has needs, everybody has fears, everybody has these things. And so when we sit in meditation and come to know ourselves, we're really coming to know everybody. And so yeah, it's been an amazing journey for sure.
I would just like to address Rebecca's question. She says, how can one make the connection that not raising animals for food actually can create more food? Do you ever try to explain that, speaking of starving people? Well, I'm not good at numbers and statistics, so I'm not the best person to address this, but I see Dr. Sailesh Rao, who's really good at all that stuff, so I'm sure he can follow up. But when I was just vegetarian, even before I ever heard of vegan back in the early 1970s, this was a very big deal. There was a book called A Diet for a Small Planet by Frances Moore Lepay that just really surged vegetarianism out into the mainstream. And her primary contention was, hey, look at this, guys. We've got starving people all over the world. And we were starting then to see mass famines. There was a horrible famine in Biafra in 1969 and others periodically. So that was an issue. World hunger was a big, big issue. Then the way that climate change is now, and it's not that world hunger has gone away, it's just the focus is not there like it was then. But in her book, she talked about how inefficient it is to raise animals for food because it takes so much grain. I believe it's 16-1 for a pound of beef. It's a little bit better for pork and better for chicken, but it's still extremely inefficient to cycle firsthand protein in the form of grains and soybeans through animals to get this second class protein that is so expensive of land, water, and human life as well as animal life.
Yeah, no, the statistic is actually, it is, when you look at just grains, it's 16:1. But if you look at food, which is not just grains, you're giving them the corn stalk, you're giving them everything from the cornfields, and you're giving them the grass to eat. So if you look at a food conversion ratio, it's 40:1. 40:1 is an average number. This is the average for meat, dairy, eggs, all put together. Okay. So if you look at just beef, then it's more like 100:1. So meaning 100 grams of food had to go into the cow to get 1 gram of food out of the cow. Because initially the cow is just eating grass. So that's not counted in the grain conversion. Right? So they just pretend that was free. So this is why, if we want to address world hunger, the only way, to me, is to have a vegan world. So to me, if we can, frame it as we are going to create a world in which there is no hunger. We are going to create a world in which anyone can come to any place of worship and get healthy, nutritious food, okay, available to them for free. It's a gift from the place of worship to the community. If we create that as a normal, then we'll eliminate hunger throughout the world, because there is always a place of worship near anyone. Okay, and so we'll eliminate hunger throughout the world, and you will create this groundswell of a new kind of living where we take for granted that we are eating right. So our health is granted to us. And then we all decide how are we going to contribute to the good of the world? How are we going to clean up the rivers? How are we going to clean up the oceans, the streams? Because right now there is no money for that. Because that's not the system we have. The system we have is all about war. It's all about creating scarcities out of abundance. So it is the opposite. And that's the reason why animal agriculture is the foundation of this system. Because that's how you create scarcity out of natural abundance. You have to take 40 grams of food, give it to the cow, and get 1 gram of food out of the cow. That's how you create scarcity.
Sailesh, can you give the statistics on water also?
Yeah, water, we know, it's like, what is it, 8,000 gallons of water for 1 pound of beef. So it's just astronomical, and depends on how you count it. So the first time Dr. David Pimentel did the calculation, he did a simple calculation, and he said it's 64,000 liters of water for 1 kg of beef. And so it's like a factor of 100 more than what you would need for potatoes, for the same kg of potatoes. So it's very similar to the ratio of food, right? It's very similar to the ratio of food. So that's how we create also scarcity in water. So we take all this water and we feed it to our animals first, or feed it to grow the food to feed our animals.
I think that this is just like there's a lot of prejudice about a lot of things in our culture. One of the prejudices that is put up against your facts is that animal products are somehow better. They're somehow of higher quality. I noticed somebody online the other day was just so upset with everybody talking about the slaughterhouse workers and all of this, and saying, look, I have a condition that just does better when I eat some meat. So we all have to figure out how to respond to somebody like that with love and care, and not impersonating a medical doctor. But there's so much prejudice about how somehow, some way, regardless of all the facts we hear to the contrary, we really do need this stuff.
Yeah, that's what we have been taught. We have been taught that that's the only source of protein at first, right? And then we discover that that's a lie. We were lied to about that, and that actually plants have a lot of protein too. In fact, every food has protein. So the association of meat and protein, that's part of that storytelling. Okay? Because meat is not the only source of protein. There's protein in everything. And then, we need to teach people that meat actually is the worst way to get protein. It is the most toxic food substance you can eat in order to get protein, because that's where all of the toxic chemicals are getting accumulated. So they just get concentrated in animal foods, and when we eat animal foods, we are actually getting concentrated doses of these toxins because they want us to get sick. And when we get sick, then they can feed us pharmaceuticals. That's the system we have, right? So we create an artificial scarcity in the food, and we know that that food is going to make people get sick, and therefore we can fish the money back from them.
There are also so many different ways of looking at nutrition. It is the most unique science, because if you look at physics, everybody agrees, oh, there's gravity. We're all stuck here. Nobody's arguing that. But in nutrition, it's more like a philosophy. You can have a discussion around nutrition that you would think was like a discussion of different religions. And just last night on Bill Maher's show, he had a physician on who was pushing full fat animal foods. I went to her website. She likes lard. And she thinks that the real problem with health is because we eat seed oils. So canola oil and soy oil and some of these other oils, that's the problem. And it was interesting to me that she was interviewed by Bill Maher, who is an animal rights person. He did a wonderful soliloquy on animal rights not long ago. He's had Ingrid Newkirk on his show this year. And yet he was also talking with this doctor about how all these fats are so great and about cholesterol doesn't really matter. And it was like, Bill, where are you going with this? But I think all of us, we tend to kind of be swayed, by who we're talking to and who we heard from last. So I think it's really, really important that we all get, certainly as educated as we need to be able to support this message. And if we don't know the answer to something, know where to go to get those answers, but also just be aware that people are being educated in other ways other than ours. I remember when the Dr. Dean Ornish work came out, and actually there were preliminary findings that came out in about 1988 before the work was actually published in 1990. And I remember reading that in my local paper one Thursday morning. I remember where I sat and I thought, wow, it's done about the nutrition and then the health. I mean, obviously now everybody knows the healthiest way to eat. It may take a while to get them to stop wearing leather shoes or whatnot, but at least we know this is how everybody's going to eat. And I really thought that. But obviously other people see things differently. So we're up against a lot.
That's what's so beautiful about the movie, The Prayer for Compassion, is because it really does take you into what's in your heart, and in the spiritual journey of that interconnection and taking you back to your inner knowing, your interconnection with source and with all that is like, there is no mistake that when you align with that and you're doing what aligns with your heart and your sincerity and is in the best interest of the whole, that nature is designed and would have it. This is my belief, of course. I know that people educated in different ways will have different beliefs, but as nature would have it, what is best for the whole is what's best for the single. As you do for yourself, you do for the whole. As you do to all of humankind, you do to yourself. And it's where I think the examination of what's in the heart and what does it mean to live a compassionate life is immensely valuable for people.
Yeah, but there are certain things that that's just science. That's the way it is. Toxins do accumulate in fat tissues. That's the way it is, because they are all lipophilic toxins. So all these chemicals we are pouring out there is getting accumulated in animal foods. And the FDA has measured it, the USDA has measured it. They've already said that 95% of the carcinogens in our bodies came from the animal foods we ate. Yeah, in America. So we know this. So this is something that cannot be disputed. It's not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of fact, right? So I think those are the things that we need to emphasize. I mean, as engineers, as an engineer, I'm not used to this idea that something is nebulous and it cannot be known, because because if I had things like that in what I was doing, I would never build anything that actually works. So there is a yes or a no. There is a certain answer to something that we are supposed to go and follow. There's a certain methodology that you have to follow in order to build things that actually work, and that has to be aligned with the truth. You cannot pretend that something is true when it isn't, or something isn't true when it is, and get something to work. Okay, so this is why when I started working on the environment, I got very confused. I said, why aren't people seeing things as they are? Because I'm so used to that over there. And so I butted my head against the wall. I was sort of trying to convince Al Gore to say it, speak it, say it, open your mouth, and couldn't do it, right? So it is a strange world we live in which there is so much of this of these lying going on. It's in the name of marketing. And this comes from the fact that we are hiding things. So we have intellectual property. We say, this is my intellectual property. I cannot tell you what this is because I need to hide it. That's how I make money. And so when we start hiding things, then it's difficult for us to tell the truth. Right? And so people are writing papers because they're working for some company that is paying them to write that kind of paper. So the science is full of misinformation at this point, which is useless for an engineer. Right? For engineers, everything has to be true.
Most Americans are not engineers, and they are just hearing things, and they're very confused. And when they hear things from us, they see it tinged with a philosophical bias. Now, I hold the philosophical bias, and yet I think there's some interesting strategic decisions we have to make as we go out with this message every day, simply because people think we have an ulterior motive. We really like animals.
We all have our biases, we all have our biases, no matter who we are. But we need to have some objective way of evaluating statements and then discerning the truth, right? And so that's what engineering is. Engineers also have biases, but we have ways to discern the truth so that we can actually agree on things when we build it. And we know that when we build something or when we design something that is not based on the truth, when we pretend something can happen when it really cannot happen, then it blows up in our faces. So we have seen that happen too. That's what the Challenger disaster was. Okay, it was a failure the engineers actually told them, don't launch it when the temperature is below 30 degrees. But they went ahead and launched it anyway because marketing said we have to do it, otherwise we'll lose face. And then the space shuttle blew up. So in the same way, to me, civilization is an engineering project. Civilization is an implementation of our culture. So we had a culture, we had these ideas that we coded in our constitution. We said all men are created equal, and we came up with these beautiful, lofty ideas. And then we tried to implement it. And in the process of implementing, we kind of deviated from the truth. Okay? We started pretending things were true when they aren't. We said, you all have to eat meat, otherwise you won't get your protein. I mean, those are outright lies, right? So when we build our civilization on those lies, it is going to blow up. And that's exactly what it's doing now. It's disintegrating in front of our eyes. Okay. So the only way for us to put it back together or to create a civilization that is sustainable, that works for all of us, for all life, is to base it on the truth and science, on the objective truth, and be open to the idea that you may be wrong when you build it. Okay, so that as new information comes in, you're willing to change your ideas, you're willing to change your civilization. And that's the only way. I mean, everyone is looking for sustainability. This is it. There is no other way to do it, right? Because anything that's not based on the truth will fail. It's a fascinating area that we are in. We are sort of, it's engineering is coming together with spirituality, is coming together with environmentalism, and we now have to create this common story which works for all, in which everyone is putting their input in, everyone is sharing their gifts.
I love the quote that you have on your website that says, "Compassion for all life is infinitely sustainable."
Right. Compassion for all life is the truth. That's really what we are. That's our. That's what makes the world go around. That's what makes life so resilient. That it's been around for 3.5 billion years. So it's only compassion that can sustain life. And I think that's why compassion will win, because that's the only thing that's sustainable. So even if even if it doesn't happen now, right? But you're going to get a bigger pandemic or something or the other is going to happen. That's going to make us say, hey, we might as well face it. We have to go there.
Speaking of compassion, during the journey when Maya and Melody and I were traveling around, right before we interviewed Dr. Mills, we were in Maryland, and we went to this religious ceremony, which I couldn't shoot. And it was a South American religion. And they have like these priestesses who channel deities. And we just so happened they were doing compassion and children that time. So they have all this ceremony, and then at some point you can come in and ask a question to a deity, and they speak in Portuguese, and then somebody translates it for you. And I was sitting there watching, and a couple things happened. One is Maya went and spoke. Maya knew she had a friend that was one of the attendees to a priestess who was a translator. And so Maya went and spoke to one of the deities, or the lady she knew. And in the middle of her thing, they pointed to Melody and called her over, and the lady said some stuff. And basically the gist was, this child is going to do something very special. You got to take care of her. That's all wonderful. But my message was, what I'll never forget is that I kept looking at this one lady, and I said, she looks like that's the one I want to go talk to. But she had this long line, and then the head priestess became available, and I just felt drawn to go to her. And I went in, and she said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, I'm on a quest of compassion, quest of compassion." And she stopped, and she turned around. They had music going, a drummer and stuff. And she said something in Portuguese, and they started playing a different song. And she said several things, but the one thing that sticks with me, she said, "Where we are, compassion is greater than love." She said, "Because with compassion, you can end all wars." And it just hit me like, wow, that's pretty amazing. You don't have to love somebody not to hurt somebody, you know, but you have to have this compassion for them. So it was not something I could include in a movie, but it was a personal lesson I got from compassion. And what was interesting is afterwards, we were speaking to the different people. Maya was introducing us, and the lady who called Melody and me over were talking to her, and it's like she'd never seen us before. She was talking to us like, you know, it was so amazing how they were channeling. And the other interesting thing is that this culture was not vegetarian at all. They were like their meat and all these things, and they had every time they had food there. After we left, I don't know if the main priestess saw forks over knives or something, but she became vegan along the journey. And so she helped create veganism in that community. So even though we didn't really get to do much, it just naturally was gravitating. But that's my compassion lesson that we couldn't include in the film.
Nice. Compassion is known as the bridge between the worlds, that through which all other attributes flow, all of the qualities of God, all of the through which love flows. And it's, you know, it's that through which we return when we're in conflict or separation with other people. When we truly find the compassion in our hearts, that's what returns us back to oneness, unity, and reconnects us with all things. And so it's, you know, it's that through which all life flows and that through which all life returns. It's a beautiful thing. I love that you chose compassion also.
Yeah, Neetha Shanti reminded us that in the Buddhist tradition, it's the most noblest virtue. Corona, or is it Corona? No, it was not Corona, but something like that. You know, I saw a question somebody mentioned earlier about family, you know, and I just want to say a couple words about family because it's going to be explored in the next film for sure. Because about a year ago, a little over a year ago, my family finally saw the film, and they all were loved the film and very moved and impressed by the film. But I didn't really see any changes, you know, and so it really kind of.
Your mother-in-law.
This happened at Summerfest, but this was after. But you're right. So it is slowly. It is happening. But the immediate family in Georgia, the Christians, you know, the ones like she's more. Not a Christian, you know, she's more atheist, so she's more a free thinker, a nurse, all this. But so it made me really, I asked that question, like, why is it not affecting these people, you know? And so that's what I explore when I talk to Dr. Melanie Joy and I talk to Claire Mann, the vegan psychologist. And one of the things, I believe it was Claire that talks about that, you know, family are the toughest, especially parents, because no matter, like, there's something about taking something from your child, like they always hold you in this thing, they always see you a certain way, so they're really the more toughest things. And so her take was that it really, you know, express yourself as much love and kindness, find the opportunities to bring it up, don't like cut any ties, you know, like just love these people because, you know, they are where they're at, but work around them, go around them in their community, go to their church, their thing. Look for the people that are on the fence, you know, look for those. I say low-hanging fruit. Sailesh talks about the people on the fence because you go for those people. And as we normalize it, what's going to happen is because honestly, in my heart, I can't imagine that anybody would say their true nature is in alignment with artificially, forcefully inseminating a being and taking her baby and stealing the baby's milk and killing the baby. Like nobody is in alignment with that. And I don't think anybody would argue that point. You know, it's just they don't see that now. So once they have the opportunity to make a choice that's so amazing for their health and just, you know, and for the environment and for just love and kindness and compassion, I think it'll be a no-brainer. But right now, I think this is the thing I don't know if anybody told me this or this is just how I feel about it. It's like I look back to like we are tribal community back when we lived in caves. If you lost your tribe or if they kicked you out, you would probably be eaten or you would starve. You needed each other. It is so primal in our DNA that our families in their communities, they don't want to be different. They don't want you like, so I don't know, you can look at me, like I have no problem. I can like follow my heart and in things, but a lot of people, it's so hard to go against the grain, and it's because of that primal fear of being separated from your tribe. So we have to really have the compassion for that and realize that not everybody can follow their heart as easy as us, because some people are locked in these prisons of culture and indoctrination, and they're afraid to rise above it. This is why I love what Victoria was saying, you know, to be present, go to rise yourself above, be an example of love and kindness, and let them see that, you know, that not only do you love them and care about them, but you are authentic in who you are, and you can do that without making them less than, because we need to make people realize they're more than so they can live up to the more than-ness, you know, in some way, to inspire them in that. So that was my thought.
That's cool. Well, I'm looking at a couple of questions over here, and one of them has got to be for Sailesh. To support what Sailesh said about physics, Jonathan Safran Foer wrote in the New York Times, when it comes to a subject as politically inconvenient as meat, it is tempting to pretend unambiguous science is advocacy, to find solace in exceptions that could never be scaled, and to speak about our world as if it were theoretical. That ends the quote. And then Ray asks the question, are vegans the natural missionaries of agricultural emissions, or is our passion off-putting? And what could be scientifically proven is dismissed as advocacy? And then he follows up, I think it's advocacy until the tipping point where the evidence becomes mainstream. And I love this last part because I think that's where we are. That is what is extremely exciting about May 23rd, 2020. We have been placed, because of circumstances beyond our control, in a position where Jonathan Safran Foer had an article about the end of meat in the New York Times. He had another one in the Washington Post, and there have been others by other people all over everywhere, because this could be our time if we use it well.
Right. You know, I mean, I agree with what Ray wrote there. It is, but as Gandhi said, it's always right to tell the truth. So no matter, even if you're a minority of one, you have to tell the truth. What you believe to be true. Okay, what you know to be true. So if we know that the agricultural emissions are the leading cause of climate change, we have to say it. Doesn't matter if people don't believe us, because the truth always has a way of getting into someone. And it may not be the first time that they hear it that they will say yes. May not be the second time, but eventually they will get it, because the truth never isn't, you know, and the untruth never is. So it never changes, right? That particular aspect never changes because it's true. That's why we have to keep speaking it. And as they say in the Bhagavad Gita, you know, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, do your duty and let go of the fruits of your action, because that is not in your hands. What that person does, how that person reacts to what you just said, is not in our hands, but it's important for us to tell the truth anyway. Yeah, and I think it is time. It is the time when we are reaching this tipping point. I mean, we have reached it. I think we have already reached this tipping point where it has now become like an infection that's going to just explode exponentially. You know, so the R naught for veganism is way greater than 1. And this is why we need to keep saying it. We need to keep finding our voice. We need to keep talking about it, because we need to increase this R naught. And people will tell us not to say the word because they want to minimize the R naught, because they don't want it to grow as fast, because they're part of the current system. Okay? So I think we need to use these, you know, the fact that it is infectious. truth is infectious. The R naught. Okay, R naught is, it is the basic reproduction ratio of an infection, of a contagion. So which is that if one person has been infected, how many people does that person infect? That's R naught on the average. So if one vegan is able to get 2 others to go vegan, then that's going to grow exponentially. Okay. But if one vegan is not able to get more than, say, less than 1 others to go vegan, then the infection will die out. But the thing about veganism is that people are spontaneously going vegan, not necessarily because they were infected by another vegan, right? People are spontaneously going vegan because the message is out there, the education is out there. So this is why veganism is going to keep growing. But the more we increase R naught, the faster we make it grow. Not only is the faster we make it grow, we also minimize the residual carnism at the end. Because there is such a thing as herd immunity. Herd immunity means that beyond so many people being infected, the infection will diminish to R naught less than 1 because everybody else is infected. So you cannot infect anymore, right? So then the R naught becomes less than 1, and therefore the infection stops. So when that stops, it could be at 70% of the population or 80% of the population. That means 20% of the population remains not infected. So they can remain carnous, right? Because this is a movement in which there's no coercion. People are doing it because they want to do it. And that's the only way I think it should be. So to minimize the residual carnism, you have to maximize R naught.
And basically, we have to make it normal because we're imprinted with what is normal at some pre-verbal stage. You know, until, I don't know, maybe it's still true, but I would say up until 10 years ago, even though I went vegetarian in 1969, vegan in 1983, if somebody said balanced meal, this plate would appear in my psyche and it would have a piece of meatloaf and some mashed potatoes and gravy, some green beans with some pieces of pork in it, a glass of milk and apple pie with ice cream on it. Either because that's a conglomeration of what I ate growing up, or there was a picture like that in the school cafeteria, but that was my normal. So I remember when I went vegetarian way, way back in the late 1960s, I was just obsessed with what do I put on the plate where the meat used to be. And I remember going to a health food store, very weird place. Nobody went there that you would hang out with. And I remember picking up a can of some kind of fake meat because I figured if I'm not going to have meat, I have to have fake meat. And around that can was the dust, the dust circle. And I thought, oh my God, you know, I'm going to actually try to gag this stuff down. So it was a very different time. And now it's like, what plate? You know, I'm a vegan. I eat in bowls. It all, you know, kind of goes together. But I think it's so important when we're working with other people to remember that although it's perfectly normal to us, what are you eating? I'm eating a Buddha bowl. People don't know what that is. And so to meet people where they are and to celebrate with them small gains. One of my most precious memories of my mom, who's passed away now, was shortly before her death. She said to me very seriously, you know, we used to think that there was something wrong with you doing that yoga and eating those beans, but now people's doctors tell them to do that. So I was vindicated by my mother's internist, and we've all been vindicated by what's been coming out in the press, by what is known in science, by our sheer numbers, by the videos from PETA and Mercy for Animals and everywhere else that are online. So when we say that's how it happens, they can't say, no, it doesn't, because it's there. So it's not an easy battle, but it's perfect time to be on the field.
Beautifully said, Victoria. Thank you. Yeah, it is the right time, I think, for this to happen. So I'm convinced that we are in the chrysalis phase, and there is no going back to the way things were. There is no going back. And if we don't make a radical transformation, there is going to be a lot of suffering. So for that reason, I think we need to get the religious community involved in alleviating this suffering. Because that's our role. That's our job. That's what we were all tasked with doing, right? No matter which religion we came from, whether it's Hinduism, Jainism, or Christianity or Islam, our job was to alleviate suffering in our community. And so now this is calling for this transformation to happen, for us to rebuild our system around abundant food, abundant vegan food available to people, so that we don't take, 40 grams of it and feed it to an animal to get 1 gram of food out of that unnecessarily. In the process, also getting slaughterhouse workers to die of COVID-19. It just makes absolutely no sense anymore. And I think if we can get places of worship to start offering vegan food, cooking vegan food, and things like that, then you're bringing the tribe along with you, right? So you're part of that same tribe. Everyone in your tribe is doing it. So you don't have to do it by yourself. So I think that's the way to get this to accelerate. And this is why I've always been convinced that the religious communities at the forefront of this movement should be at the forefront of this movement, because that's the only way any major transformation has happened in human society. Even apartheid, I heard from Bishop Davis, apartheid did not happen until the World Association of Reformed Churches, I think it was called, WARC, issued a proclamation in Ottawa in 1986 saying that apartheid is a heresy. It goes against the foundation of our religion. So then, there was no moral standing for apartheid whatsoever. So they had to collapse. So I think the same thing needs to happen here, where the religious community, some organization of religions, maybe it's prayer for compassion. People who did prayer for compassion. This is why I was looking at us as a way to start this process off. So we need to write this book saying animal agriculture is immoral, or something to that effect. Eating animals is immoral, something to that effect. So that we bring that aspect to the discourse.
The argument I get from ministers is, but what about farmers? Now, I've had the same argument from urban ministers who, if a farmer was in their church, he'd have to drive 40 miles. But they're just very, very concerned about it. And I think the denominations are concerned about it, because in this country, at least in lots of parts of the countries and in the more traditional kinds of religions, the numbers are going down. They're trying to hold on to that. And the idea of saying to a swath of the population, we're going to espouse this thing that will put you out of business, that's very threatening to a clergy person. So how would the panel members handle that?
That's a good question. But right now they're seeing that farmers are anyway going bankrupt, and small farmers are all disappearing. And even our government is telling them, get big or get out. Okay. So literally when you go vegan now, when you espouse veganism, you are affecting large corporations. You're not affecting farmers anymore. Farmers have all been enslaved into doing this. And imagine the farmers working for 20 years and having like a $100,000 debt still over their heads. That's the way, because they're literally just slave labor for corporations that are driving them. We need to give them another way we need to give farmers a way to transition to plant-based farming so that they can start contributing to society. And we need to get our governments to start supporting that. There should be a farmer transition administration. I know. I hope that after the next election, it'll happen, but we'll see.
Well, I had Leah Garces from Mercy for Animals on my podcast. For people that don't know about that, it's the Main Street Vegan podcast. We've been weekly since 2012. But when Leah was on, in the past 6 months or so, she told the best farmer transition story. She talks to a lot of farmers and a lot of people in other aspects of the meat industry and really tries to meet them human to human without judgment, and she'll listen to them. And this particular chicken farmer had 2 chicken houses, which I think Tyson or one of the other big chicken companies employed him. Now, he had not sat daydreaming in school as a little boy that he wanted to raise chickens when he grew up, but he did have family land and he wanted to raise his family on this land, and he had to make some money somehow. So the chicken company came to him, and for a salary of, I believe she said $30,000 a year, he raised chickens in these factory farm situations. So she talked to him and she didn't tell him what to do. She just mostly listened. And if he asked a question, she gave an answer. And this went on for a period of about 4 years. And the last time she went to see him, he told her that he was turning those 2 chicken houses into medical marijuana growing houses, and that he was looking to make within 2 years' time, not $30,000 a year, but $600,000. So when we've got stories like that, we need to tell them.
Yeah, you know, the animal farmers as well as the coal miners, all of these people, like, we need to have, I think I remember at the first Vegan 2026, that was one of the categories, one of the questions we pulled up, and I'm sure there's still a big group working on what do we do, and what Renee is doing with Rowdy Girl and the Rancher Advocacy program. Like, we need to tout these people and get more information. These stories, I mean, I guess mushroom farming, cannabis farming, like there's a lot of ways we can transition these people, because I'm sure that they don't, want to be part of this. I'm sure they love their animals in some way. That's why they're having trouble killing them instead of sending them off. Bless their hearts. Yeah. So let's give them an opportunity, just like I don't think any coal miner would go down into the ground and risk his life every day if he had an opportunity of something else. So it is like letting them know we're not out to bankrupt anybody. We're out to transition industries, but only because we have to, because we can't sustain the industries as they are, I think.
The farmers in my area are defensive and afraid. And so I think they will be more comfortable once they hear that there are options. Right now, they're still hanging on and hoping that the animal ag industry will defend them, and that sort of thing, and promote their product.
I wonder. I wonder, like I see people post, repost like a farmer who's a dairy farmer, and they post, like Mother's Day, and they got their baby like feeding the dairy, like they're proud of what they're doing, and they post it, and then the vegans are going in there letting them know, hey, well, show us the other side of the dairy. Maybe we should try to let vegans know when you're doing that, why don't you also post a link to like the Rancher Advocacy program or some other alternatives, like say, hey, we understand you think this is great, but guess what? There are other alternatives if you'd like to, so, and one other thing about the religious thing too is getting the message in the community. I was thinking, trying to find celebrities that are religious in some way, and getting them to actually open, you know, say words about their faith and how veganism is in alignment with them. Getting celebrities and getting some famous ministers. I mean, I don't know if anybody has access, and I don't know what celebrities are Christian or Muslim or Jewish, but I think, you know, getting some voices that have more people listening to them, letting people know, hey, let's talk about this. Let's just talk about it. Would this go in alignment with your tradition? Would this make you feel like you're living your faith and your values a little more? You know, have you ever examined this? Like finding ways to get those questions to the right people. If anybody does know any celebrities that are religious, and you know, I'd love to try to do some PSAs, coming up with just 30-second, 1-minute PSAs to plant a seed, to plant a question, to have people just ponder upon. Because I agree with Sailesh, like you can mandate this, you can make slaughterhouses illegal, but until people embrace it, it's never going to really, it's the world, you know, having people do it by force is not what will never create a vegan world, I don't think.
And how close do we want to get to non-vegan issues that we may oppose vehemently that someone holds who happens to eat in this way? So I'm thinking about Franklin Graham. So a couple of years ago, this son of Billy Graham, who now heads that organization, went plant-based for his health. And then he seemed to kind of give it up, like often happens when it's a diet. But now he's evidently back and has been photographed with animals and other things. That's all good. And yet he is notoriously homophobic. So do we say we'll meet you on the plant-based front and we'll just leave the rest aside? It's a little bit like, you know, when people want to work with the meat industry to get them to do some non-meat stuff too. So where do you guys stand on all that?
You have to be very careful. I agree. Like, you know, it's funny, like as we were making the film, there were people we were going to interview that we didn't interview, and then they got in trouble. We were like, oh my God, we missed that one. You know, you really want to be careful that, I mean, this is, I am keeping such an open mind as I go through this process. I'm open to ideas. I sit with them. You know, I don't know that it's really hard to tell the truth now. It's really hard to tell even if you hear somebody a message from somebody, you don't know if that's a real message or if somebody doctored it. Like as a filmmaker, I know the possibilities. So I know that I can't know everything. And so I think that, but what I do know is that I feel, as Victoria was saying, as part of this realizing that I want to have more people hear me than not hear me and tuning it out. I'm really careful about the messages I do put out. You know, it really needs to be something I believe in strongly. Like, and you know, if it's going to trigger somebody and I really believe it, I'll do it anyway. But you know, if I'm not totally 100% sure and I know it's going to trigger people, I'm going to pull back and know that it's better to keep their ears than to push them away at this point. You know, because it really is about planting the seed, and then one day they can make the connection. You know, it's not like you say, go vegan, and they go, wow. I mean, I really thought when I started making the film, because I didn't know, I mean, I was vegan 8 years before I knew cows weren't just milk machines. Like I never thought about that. So once I really saw what was happening in the dairy industry, I said, oh man, that's it. Once people know that, like if I had known that, I would have been out a long time ago. Once people know that, they're out of here. Unfortunately, people just don't. Even Promoda has a beautiful story about how she went vegan. She's been vegetarian her whole life, who's in the film. You know, she had this great story where she's at this event and she's having a milkshake and all these two ladies are looking at her like, and then one of them says, you're drinking a milkshake. Do you know what's happened to dairy cows? She said, it's dairy. They're not killed. What's, you know, and then they told her, and guess what? She went to her home. They were in Las Vegas. She went back to her hotel and her husband was there. And he said, guess what I learned today? And they both learned that same day. But, you know, she finished her milkshake after she heard that. And then they went back to New York And they woke up and her husband said, I don't want dairy in my chai. And she went ahead and had it. She still had it. And this is a very spiritual being. She was introduced to the truth and she still wasn't, she had to process it. And it was after she was at the grocery store, she saw these non-dairy milks. And she was like, called the guy over and said, hey, how long have these been here? And he said, they've always been here. And she took one home to her husband and said, look at this. And that was it. Like, she saw the alternative. She was faced with the truth. It took her a few days, but we have to realize it's up to us to plant seeds, water seeds that are planted and fertilizing, and just really tune in. Like Victoria was saying too, is we really need to know as much as we can so we can answer the questions and know where to get the answers, and be present with people where they're at, and see if you see the eyes gloss over. If you lose them, find a way to bring them back. Tell a joke, make them smile. Like, the way to pull the blood from the back of the head back to the front is love, compassion, humor. All of these things reconnect us because we're all connected. You know, it's only when we feel that, so we have to find ways to bring people in. And sometimes I know it's hard if you're sitting there thinking that person is part of the problem, and it's so easy to know, especially if somebody knows it and they're still doing it. It's really hard not to have that feeling. So, you know, and we're human, so we may have that feeling, but it's really important that we really live that feeling, on that feeling when we're not in their presence, and then be able to be present with a person with love. You know, this is where, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but meditation, meditation, and meditation. When I see NPR and all these other places I hear, and, you know, I was listening to something and they were talking about how all the meditation apps are like, way more people are getting the meditation apps. And I'm going, wait, this is it. This is it. People all they got to do is start tuning in. I became vegan, not because I knew a vegan or vegetarian. It's because I started meditating every day. And I realized, oh, animals are hurt. And I'm like, it was a natural thing when you tune into your own self and your own compassion. So I'm excited. And I do believe this is the time. And we're just here to give the extra little encouragement and push to people and love to help them come through it, and realize people are going to be afraid. People are going to say, you know, when I went vegan, I thought, you know, this is 2005 before YouTube. I thought I might get sick and die. You know, I thought I was going to get weaker for sure. I definitely didn't think I would get stronger. How was I going to get stronger without calcium and protein, you know? And there are still people that have those primal fears. So even with game changers, but yeah.
Well, I think what we're looking at right now, it's really come to the fore. It's almost like I think of a mixed martial arts or a boxing match where you've got these two competitors looking right at each other, and you've got this new way of life, which includes veganism and the whole kind of picture that Dr. Rao has come up with for Vegan World 2026. Then you've got the status quo. And I think that what has happened just in the last month, when the president brought in the Defense Production Act, for what? For tanks? For guns? Our intergalactic missile, you know, so we don't get bombed off the planet. Oh, no, so that slaughterhouse workers have to go to work and produce critical infrastructure to get meat into people. And I've written an op-ed that I trust will be seeing the light of day somewhere. But one of the things I say in there is, it is deeply troubling when an industry and a government require workers to risk their lives in the short term to provide a product that is risking consumer lives and quality of life in the long term. You know, when you look at that with any kind of logic, there is absolutely none. It's not only immoral, it's unreasonable. And I think we need to get out there with the reasonability of our message. This is not leftover hippie stuff. This is not some kind of, you know, bizarre, some wing or other wing politically. This is reasonable. And I think people are craving rationality now, maybe more than ever.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Victoria. I think it is. I mean, it just makes no sense whatsoever. I cannot imagine FDR doing something like this, right, in the middle of a war, doing something that is going to make sure that America will lose in the war, and make that a critical infrastructure. That's exactly what has happened here. Calling something critical infrastructure that's going to make sure that we will have more coronavirus victims, more COVID-19 victims. And that too, that people will eat foods that's going to make them more and more susceptible to COVID-19, to make them more, become emergency room patients because they still have the same underlying preconditions. So it just absolutely doesn't make any sense, as you said. It's just illogical. And it's not only unreasonable, it's illogical completely.
Yeah, I love how you put it. When we were in India, you were talking about the grains being taken away from the people that are starving, when I saw what was happening to the slaughterhouse workers, I thought the same thing. You're like, whose meat are you eating anyway? Whose death are you eating when you eat something that is taking away and starving children or making people get sick? You're eating a product that caused this suffering to this person, and we're aware of it now. There's no denying it, So whose meat are you eating? That was a great one, Silas. Like, it brings it home to our hearts.
I think it's through these conversations that we get the message out, that we refine our message, and we need to get it out to people so that they can respond accurately. And so, yeah, Victoria is right. We are head to head. We are now right facing each other, saying which way are we going to go, right? Are we going to continue along the same old path of destruction, or are we going to change, transform ourselves, that we get to a vegan world as quickly as possible? A world in which people are, people feel like the community is there to take care of them. It's not about and I'll tell you, it was food. So I was cooking for them every day for 10 days. So it's 2 meals a day, 5 people in the family. So I was making a meal, it was 10 meals, and I was taking them every day and bringing back the container and taking a new meal every day. So every day I was thinking of what else can I cook for them? That's whole food, plant-based, and that's tasty. So they feel like, this is the way I want to live from now on. And I got feedback from them that they never thought that plant-based food would be this tasty, right? And they didn't know how to cook like this. They're from Guatemala. And so after the 10 days, when the husband got a job, they didn't need the food anymore. So they thanked me and all that. And then they were asking for recipes as to how did you make this food? So in a way, just volunteering to cook for people, volunteering to feed them, when they had no other way. They had no other way. There are lots of instances like that. People are just going to these food banks and picking up food. But most of the time, they don't know what to do with beans and rice. And, they just boil it and eat it, right? Whereas with a few herbs and spices, we can make this taste so good. And I think that's the skill that we need to transfer now. We need to make that more universal. So PCRM has this whole idea of a universal meal where it has none of the allergens. So all the recipes that they have collected don't have any allergens, don't have any meat or dairy or eggs. So it's something that you can pretty much cook anywhere and give it to anyone, and it's edible for them. That's the idea.
An idea that I was talking with the $1 Million Vegan people about as they decide who they're going to choose next to try to get to be vegan. And this was when we still had flying airlines. And I suggested Richard Branson, because it is the weirdest thing when you get on a plane, if it's a long enough flight where they're going to feed you, that you have all these many choices. You can choose lacto-vegetarian or non-dairy vegetarian. You can get a kosher, you can get halal, and you can get gluten-free, and all these, and pork-free. And yet, if it's vegan and with whatever religious certifications it might need, vegan and gluten-free is everything. And so the idea that with airlines having such a bad reputation carbon-wise, if we could get one to go vegan, number one, it would save them a lot of money and a lot of hassle. And you know, they could always say, okay, if you have some kind of health issue, so you need a meat meal, you can have one. It's almost like we need to at least get it to where smoking was back when there was a smoking section, and now there is none. But it needs to be that people who want meat have to go to the trouble to order the extra meal, that we need to be the norm and they need to be the other.
I like that, the vegan airline idea a lot, Victoria. I was hoping, this isn't a question from the chat, this is something I was hoping to bring up to Dr. Rao based on previous discussions about kind of overestimating our fellow humans, or, you know, believing in the best and rising to the occasion, like when you go to church. Dr. Rao, you posted a clip of a lecture that talks about kind of believing in overestimating our fellow man. Do you remember that? Can you speak to that a bit?
Yes, it was a lecture by Viktor Frankl. And so he was saying that he actually was quoting Goethe, you know, and when you, so let me see if I have the quote here with me. So he was saying that if you overestimate your fellow man, then you give him a chance to be who he can be. But if you estimate a fellow man to be where he is now, then he'll be worse than where he is. So let me see the exact quote.
Yeah, I really liked that little video.
Yeah, we have to believe in our fellow men, you know, because that's how you make them become better than who they can be.
I just like to bring up the slaughterhouse workers in the religious context, because this is an issue that churches have traditionally gotten behind. A lot of people, a lot of churches supported the Cesar Chavez grape boycott back in the 1970s. That was so big and so far reaching that to this very day, every time I eat a grape, I have to stop and think, wait a minute, is this okay? I mean, it really got into the mainstream. And I think we're poised for that to happen right now about meat and other animal products. And one of the reasons for that is the human rights issue about the workers. And the truth is, a slaughterhouse has always been a dangerous place to work. It has a 100% turnover rate. It has the highest injury rate of any industry that OSHA tracks. And since the early 20th century, it's been an industry that has drawn the newest immigrants and the people on the lowest rung of the socioeconomic ladder. So I think that's why it's important that, you know, it feels sometimes a little bit strange. It's like, well, wait a minute, I'm vegan. Why should I be supporting somebody who wants to be paid better to kill animals? Well, because we want them to be paid well doing something else, but we need to be on their side first. And for me, I spent one day in a slaughterhouse. I know a lot of people have done undercover work and they've spent months there. My hat is off to them. But that one day really changed my life. And one of the biggest surprises that I had in doing that was that I walked in there with a very us and them kind of mindset. Like, I am the vegan, I am the great savior. These animals would not be killed if everybody were only like me. Within a minute, I walked in there and it was so clear that there were two groups of victims. One, obviously the animals, but the other, those workers. So they're ankle deep in blood in a refrigerator, using sharp objects, hearing not only the screams of the animals, but this din of noise, loud equipment, and stress. Like, I know for me, I get stressed when I've got two things due at once, or more people want me than I can talk to on a computer and a phone. But that's how the work is at this place. The carcasses go by so fast. And I remember seeing the USDA inspector, and it was so clear, unless this man is Superman with X-ray vision, there's no way he could see the other side of that animal. You know, the idea of meat inspection and safe food and all that is ridiculous once you've been there and seen that. And so to just, I remember looking in the eyes of some of these workers and just knowing that they're not the enemy. And so that's another one of our wonderful opportunities right now. We can stand in solidarity with them. And yeah, some of them are going to be working in the meat industry still. But just like everybody else, some of them are going to see something different. And as soon as they have the opportunity, they'll be out of it. But these are not people with a lot of opportunity. Sailesh, you and Goethe, that's exquisite.
Yeah, if we take man as he is, we make him worse. But if we take man as he should be, we make him capable of becoming what he can be. Yeah. I've learned a lot watching Viktor Frankl and his videos. See, one of the things he said is, we are always looking for meaning in our lives. Meaning as, you know, who are we? What is our purpose? How do we fit? And how do we belong? So this is why we tell the story of the thermostat species. So in which, you know, like I was telling Thomas in Morocco, if everyone was Buddha, it would be in an ice age by now, right? And because we were not Buddha, we kept it out of the ice age. And now we have to become Buddha to bring it back, to bring the temperature back to normal. So this is why I think we are going to become Buddhas, because that's what nature is asking us to do. That's what's called for all life to thrive. And so I'm convinced that life will thrive. Life is trying to thrive at all times. And we are part of life. We have always been an integral part of life. And so, so this is the search for meaning I went to when I was looking for when Kimaya was born, and she made me go do this. She said, you know, go use your head and figure out why I'm perfect exactly as I am, right? So, and so to me, it is seeing things as they really are is enlightenment, you know. So getting getting a story that makes you feel like you belong, that is the only way out for us. So, I mean, any culture has rules about how you deal with each other, and it has it also has an origin story, and it has this promise of eternity, promise of an eternal life. So meaning you live forever if you do these things. Okay, that's what every culture has. And so in the vegan culture also, we need to have these things. And so to me, this promise of eternity is that we do belong as a species, as an important species in the fabric of life. And therefore we have a job to do for as long as we want. Okay? So that is to become a caretaker species and to maintain life, help life thrive. So we, so this is the amazing thing that's happening, right? So we were initially the prey species. So we were being eaten by animals. And then we became a predator species. We started eating animals. We started killing them. And now we have to become a caretaker species. And that's something that has never happened. There has never been a caretaker species. Okay? Neither prey nor predator. So that's us getting to the butterfly, from the caterpillar to the chrysalis and the butterfly.
I remember, Sailesh, in your book, one of the things that helped encourage me was when I read the part about the whole universe is pulling for this to happen. You know, it's not just me, I want it this way. It's not just us. It's the whole, I mean, those aren't the words you used, I don't think, but that's what I got from what you were saying.
Right. The animals are asking us to do it. The animals gave us the COVID-19 and said, think about it. Think about what you're doing, right? And we have more where that came from if you don't listen. Okay. So now everyone is aware that these things came from animals, even though it's been known, right? I mean, Dr. Michael Greger had a video in 2008, I think, talking about zoonotic diseases. So they knew, so he knew, but it wasn't common knowledge until COVID-19. Now it's become common knowledge. People know that, these are all zoonotic diseases. I didn't know that typhoid was a zoonotic disease, cholera was a zoonotic disease. I didn't know any of that. Now I know. Now I realize most of those things that we were being vaccinated against all came from animals. So if we weren't doing that to animals, we wouldn't have those diseases in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's an awakening. I think 2020 is the year when we see things as they are. So it is the year of 2020 vision.
Well, Deborah just posted something that absolutely broke my heart, where she said that the law was recently passed where the speed on the meat processing lines was going to be even faster and the requirements for inspection less. And I think because all humans are driven by self-interest, that this is certainly something that our meat-eating friends and relatives need to know about, because even before they care about the animals or the workers, they can care about eating something that they perceive to be unsafe.
Yeah, there is also a question about how long will the COVID-19 remain on carcasses. So especially when you freeze the meat, right? When you freeze the meat or you refrigerate the meat, it just lives longer on refrigerated foods. So the likelihood of passing COVID-19 through the meat is very high, actually, especially if the slaughterhouse workers are all infected and they're being forced to work despite their infection. So there's only one way this is going to end, is when we close it all down. You know, there is no other way to end it.
And I think it's so important for us to be just as open-minded as we can possibly be on this front, because I know some of us don't like to eat processed foods. I don't like to eat processed foods. I mean, I'm at the age where my health is a big deal to me, and yet I am thrilled about Beyond Burgers. I mean, thrilled beyond the heavens. And when I hear that their stock goes up 30% in a month, this is cool, because it's going to take all of us, you know, it's going to take everybody with our different little dietary ideas and our different ways of looking at some of these big picture issues, because we're trying to forge a revolution, one for which arguably the greatest beneficiaries cannot participate. And that's the animals. And that's really theoretical, because I think Esther the Wonder Pig has a lot to say, and as they all do if we listen long enough. But we're really fighting, you know, for the planet, for one another, but very, very much for this group that nobody's ever consistently fought for in large enough numbers that it mattered until now. So that's a big deal too.
Right, and also the meat industry is talking about robots. They're going to deploy robots to kill the animals. And I think that's a dangerous place to get into, because if you have robots killing moving things, if it's an animal, then it's likely to go and kill people too. You know, because how does it know the difference between animals and people? So you may see someone lying on all fours and start killing that person. So it's a dangerous place we are getting into when we deploy robots for killing.
It's a terrible thing to expect our fellow humans to do something that we would not do. The idea of robots is scary in its own right, because it's the idea of robotic killing. And not that humans killing is a good thing, but at least we've got some history there. You know, we've gotten used to it. We know that people have eaten meat for millennia and all that. But the idea that we're now creating killing machines is just very, very eerie.
Also, if we want to get to the place where we are living in alignment, I mean, this is about religion and spirituality and compassion. If we want to get to a place, I mean, we have already done enough to be able to put the blinders on and turn away from what's happening, pretend it's not happening, and just go along with it because it's the way we've been conditioned and it's what we believe we have to have. There's enough of that already. If we can further distance it with robots, that's really scary. I mean, and what is that saying about what it takes in order for us to be able to literally stomach what's happening without having to face it?
So far, it's still a tough problem for robotics, because the animals are not complying with this. They're not going to go along. They're fighting every step of the way. So it's difficult for robots to distinguish that from what is from other things. So they don't have the technology yet to do this, but they're working on it. And meanwhile, they are trying to deploy, prison labor, all kinds of other oppressed people, and forcing them to work.
I heard, and I can't document this, but I was told by a fellow vegan that around the time when the first refugees were coming from the war in Syria, the Canadian government had invited them there because they couldn't get Canadians to work in the slaughterhouses. And they thought that these people from a war zone would be grateful and that they would want to take this job. And many of them just said, sorry, you can send me back to Syria, but I'm not doing this. And, I hope whether or not it's true, it could be true. It's one of those kind of stories.
A few years ago, I saw a video that was mechanized, a big kind of like vacuum cleaner scoop that was grabbing up hundreds of chickens at a time. And I saw it go through the line, and then I just had to stop. I couldn't watch it anymore. And it was less violent. I wasn't seeing the violence that we see in things, but it was this whole concept of distancing from what was going on. That video was eventually taken down from a company that must have been pleased with its robotics, because I tried to find it a week later and it was gone. But yeah, that scares me. But maybe we won't even go there.
But we're always given a choice, right? So even in the Bhagavad Gita, after giving Arjuna all that advice, Krishna tells him, I love you so much that I set you free even from me, and you're free to choose. You're free to choose, but the outcome is in my hands, right? Literally, it's just, doesn't matter what you do, the outcome is still going to be the same. It's your choice as to how much suffering you want to get, before you realize that you need to be over there. So I see that happening here. We choose to go vegan right away, and we do this right away. We figure out a new system, whatever. We are capable of doing that as a species. We are capable of creating a new game in which we can all live great lives, thriving lives, and the whole earth can thrive, right? So we can design that and adopt that right now, or we wait until so many billion people die before we do that. It's up to us. But before all those people die, a lot of animals are going to die. So it's going to be a really difficult to bring life back if we let it go even further. So it's going to be harder and harder for us.
Well, Dr. Rao, I have a question for you and Thomas and anybody else who wants to address it. What do you do with people who have professed religious beliefs that cause them to not believe in climate change?
For me, climate change is a question of, it's just a question of chemistry, physics. It's just science. So we know that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. We have known that for 300 years. And there are all kinds of laboratory experiments to show that it's a greenhouse gas. I mean, everything is, every gas that you put into the atmosphere has a certain frequency range over which it is opaque. Okay, that's the way it is, depending on the molecular structure. And carbon dioxide, we know, is opaque in the infrared region. So which means it is going to reflect infrared energy back. Okay? And we know we are burning fossil fuels. We know we are burning them. And we know when we burn them, you're going to convert carbon into carbon dioxide. So it's not a question of, is this true or not? No, is there any doubt about it? No, it is. This is the way greenhouse gases act.
Well, I think you have, all of us are already convinced,
Right.
but I'm just going to play a game with you and be kind of devil's advocate and say to you, but Dr. Rao, God made this earth, and this earth is going to be here as long as God wants it to be here, and humans can't do anything about that.
Right. Absolutely. This is also the message of the Bhagavad Gita. He says, look, the outcome is in my hands, not in yours. So it is going to happen. What God wants is going to happen. Only thing we control is how much suffering we want to take. Okay? So the longer you fight, the more suffering you're going to get. So it's it's not that see, the way the Bhagavad Gita puts it is, we can act anytime. We can change anytime we want to, right? We can come into alignment anytime we want to. So it's the wishing tree story, right? In the wishing tree story, it's when do you start wishing for the benefit of everyone else and not just for yourself? When you start doing that, then you'll discover that you can be very happy wishing under the tree. But as long as you're wishing for yourself, you will be unhappy. You will be miserable. So a selfless person is not, he's not doing anything extraordinary. A selfless person is just figured out that being selfless makes more sense than being selfish. Because you're happier being selfless than you would if you're selfish. Okay? So it's when do you want to switch? It's up to you. So God will win. Yeah, eventually, this is what I also say. God will win eventually, but it's how much suffering do we want to take? How much do we want to fight him? God's way is the way of compassion. We know that. This is why, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa had this beautiful saying. He said, as long as you're asleep, you think you have free will. It's only when you wake up, you realize that you have been played all along. So we think we have free will, when we are asleep. We think we are doing this. We are in charge. And then when we wake up, we realize we never had free will and we will never have free will. Because when you wake up, you're always doing what is the most compassionate thing to do. So you don't have a choice. There is no free will anymore. You know that at that point.
Victoria, I want to say something about what you said as well. The question. Several years ago, I was at a store with one of my older relatives, and we were talking about something, and I mentioned the environmental devastation animal agriculture is having. And he said, God will fix it. God will fix it. And I understood at the moment, I'm old enough to know that if I said what I'm going to tell you right now that I really thought I wanted to say, he wouldn't have heard it. He would have been offended and he would have went in a whole nother direction. But the first thought, what I really wanted to say was like, on this planet, what hands does God have beside ours? These are the hands of God. This is the voice of God. We take action for God. God cannot work on this planet without, or he can, but or he or she or it flows through us. So, when somebody says, at least that question, when they say, well, God will fix it, it's like, well, who's God's workers? Like what hands do God have besides my hands? So, yeah, it's sad to know there are a lot of Christians who deny climate change and who believe that God's just going to fix it. Or it's that old story, what is it, where the floods are coming and people come to help him and he's like, no, God's going to save me. God's going to save me. And by the time he's up on the roof and the water's about to hit him, the helicopter's coming, and he's like, God's going to save me, Well, who do you think God, he dies, goes to heaven, and God said, well, I sent you 3 cars and a helicopter, 3 boats and a helicopter. So, yeah, we just have to realize it's our responsibility. And hopefully, again, to what Victoria was saying, like, it's through our example of showing that we take that responsibility seriously and in our actions and living simply and being vegan. But yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, it's not just hands. God also has paws, right? So, so you can see the COVID-19 is also, it's a message for us to wake up and to accelerate our transformation. Now is the time, and we are listening. When people are listening, so this is why Goethe's quote is very important. People are listening. We need to give them credit, give people credit for taking it in now. If you believe everything happens for the best, you actually your actions are coming from a place of faith, because you're saying this is the way it is meant to be. And so based on that, how can I do? What can I do? How can I contribute? Yeah.
One of the taglines that we had for the film was something about what would you eat if God did the grocery shopping? Something of the idea, it's not so much our changing outcomes, it's our cooperating with beneficence. And that's really veganism in action.
And God has done the grocery shopping.
Yeah, Ray is talking about an evangelical pastor. Say that the 10 commandments are easy once you're in Christ, because they stop being rules and become promises. I love that. Because when you kill or steal, you're when you steal, you're just stealing from yourself. There's nothing there that you really need. Well, thank you all for this great discussion, and thank you very much for joining us. We will have this video on both our website and on Facebook, so you can please feel free to share it. And I think the more we talk, the closer we come to where we need to be. So thanks again for the wonderful discussion today.
Thanks, everybody. Night.
Thank you. God bless. Namaste.